She was humiliated, embarrassed, and harassed for months. Nobody could imagine she was the mother of the most feared Korean Mafia boss in America. They had no idea what she meant to him. She is the reason he is alive. She carried him out of the worst night of his life when he was 5 years old. She raised him across 3 cities, shaped him into everything he became. Without her, there is no empire, no throne, no man that entire organizations quietly rearrange themselves to avoid. But nobody knew that. They showed up at her shop and got in her face, threatened her, mocked her accent, spread lies through her church until her own pew went cold around her, burned her business down, and stood outside watching it go, came back and pulled her garden out of the ground with their bare hands and left it in the dirt. And she stood there in front of the ashes of everything she had built, and she did not call anyone. She just straightened her coat and walked back inside because that was the kind of woman she was. They did all of this because they believed nobody powerful was coming for her. She was just a 62-year-old black woman, Trinidadian accent, church coat, a small alteration shop on a Southwest Atlanta street. They treated her like she was invisible. A man whose name made entire organizations go quiet was already watching. He had never stopped watching over her. She did not know it. She would have argued against it if she had. But he had a man in that neighborhood from the day she moved in. Quiet, invisible, just there. And when the things escalated beyond a certain point, that man made one call. Soo Hyun answered on the first ring. He did not ask questions. He did not send anyone ahead. He put on his coat, walked to his car, and drove to Atlanta alone in the dark. They kept pushing right up until the night his car turned onto their street. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody ever does. If you are new here, welcome to JudCee's Stories. Subscribe and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story like this. Now, let us go all the way back to the beginning. Her name was Marlene. Marlene Celestine Joseph. Born in Fyzabad, Trinidad, third of 6 children. Her father preached on Sundays and fixed engines the rest of the week. Her mother raised 6 children without losing a single one to the street. Marlene grew up understanding that survival was not luck. It was discipline applied every single day without an audience. She married at 31. Conrad Joseph, truck driver, steady, good. They had one son, Daniel. Conrad died of a heart attack when Daniel was 9 years old. Marlene buried him on a Saturday and went back to work on Monday because stopping was not something she was built for. She moved them to Houston, Texas when Daniel was 16. 2 jobs for 3 years until she could breathe again. Daniel grew up fine, became a physical therapist, called her every Sunday. And then one Tuesday night, everything changed. Daniel was driving home from a late shift when a truck ran a red light and hit his car on the driver's side at full speed. The paramedics told the hospital they did not understand how he was still alive. Marlene sat in that waiting room for 7 hours straight, Bible in her lap, eyes open. She was not the kind of woman who fell apart in public. She was the kind of woman who prayed with her whole body while her face gave nothing away. At hour 3, a Korean man sat down across from her. He did not introduce himself. He simply sat down the way a person sits when they have already decided something. He told her quietly that he had access to a specialist surgical team, that they could be there within 90 minutes, that the cost was not her concern and that she owed him nothing for it. She said, "Why?" He said, "Because I am able to. And because choosing not to act when you are able is also a choice. I prefer not to make that choice." She read him the way she read everyone, not from the surface, from underneath. What she found was not performance or agenda. A man who meant exactly what he said. She said, "All right." Daniel came through. The Korean man refused every attempt at repayment. A message arrived a month later. It said only, "Your son is well. That is enough." His name was Yoon Tai-won. Marlene carried that name in her chest for 4 years without knowing she was carrying it. Then on a Tuesday evening in February, everything shifted. A man named Oh Chang-soo called her phone. Former head of security for the Yoon family in Chicago. He spoke carefully. Yoon Tai-won was dead, killed inside his own home 8 days ago. His wife had died 3 years earlier. Their son, Soo Hyun, was 5 years old. No family left. The boy had nobody. She asked, "Why are you calling me?" He said, "Because Tae-won kept records, everything he ever did, every person he helped. You are in those records, your son's name, the hospital, the date, and a note in his own handwriting. It says, "If I am gone and my son has no one, call this woman. She knows what it costs to hold something together when everything is trying to come apart." Marlene was quiet. She looked at the framed page on her kitchen wall, her late husband's unfinished sermon heading, written on the last morning of his life. It read, "What we owe each other." She asked, "How old is he?" 5, Oh Chang-soo said. "He has not cried once. He keeps asking when his father is coming home from his business trip." Marlene closed her eyes. She knew that silence. She had heard it once before. In her own son. The particular silence of a child who has understood something enormous and has not yet found a container large enough to hold it. She said, "I will be there Friday." She planned to stay 2 months. She stayed 26 years. The Yoon house in Lincoln Park was large and quietly expensive and completely silent in the way houses go silent when the person who made them matter is gone. Oh Chang-soo met her at the door with the face of a man who has been holding something too heavy for too long. Soo-hyun was in the kitchen. Sitting at the table in front of a glass of juice he was not drinking, looking out at the back garden with the fixed attention of a child working very hard to think about something other than what he was thinking about. Small for 5, dark hair, his father's jaw, a stillness that did not belong to a child his age. Marlene sat down across from him. Straight, present. She did not perform gentleness. She said, "My name is Marlene. Your father did something for my son 4 years ago that I have never been able to repay. So I am here, not because anyone told me to come, because it is the right thing." He said, "My father liked people who told the truth." She said, "Good, because I do not know how to do anything else." He nodded. "Once?" Then he asked, "Can you cook?" She said, "I am Trinidadian. Cooking is not a skill where I come from. It is a responsibility." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, a decision. He said, "Okay." That was the beginning of everything. That same evening after Soo-hyun was in bed, Oh Chang-soo told her the rest of it. The Yoon organization had operated out of Chicago for 35 years, built not on spectacle, but on arrangement. The kind of influence that does not announce itself because announcement is weakness. Yoon Taiwan had refined it with a code that set him apart from every other man in his world. No narcotics, no trafficking, no violence against people outside the life. These were not rules. They were the bones of how he understood himself, and his most trusted man had decided those bones needed breaking. His name was Baek Sung-chul. 17 years at Taiwan's side, the man he trusted most. And for 5 of those 17 years, laying the groundwork to take everything. He did not act from hatred. What drove him was a cold belief that he was more capable than the man he served, and that Taiwan's code was a luxury the organization could not afford. He had waited, and when his moment came, he moved with the efficiency of a man who has been rehearsing the same action for 5 years. He made one mistake. He did not check whether the boy was asleep. Soo-hyun had come downstairs for water. He heard his father's voice through the study door, and then another voice, and then a sound he would spend 20 years trying to find words for. He was standing in the hallway when the door opened. He had seen Baek Sung-chul's face. Baek looked down at the child for a long moment. Then he straightened his jacket and walked down the hall without a word. A 5-year-old boy was not a variable worth adjusting for. By the time the child mattered, everything would be too consolidated to threaten. That decision was the only one that mattered in the end. Marlene sat in that kitchen after midnight and felt something settle inside her. Not fear, not grief, something colder and more useful than both. She said, then, "We are not staying here. Not for long." Oh, Chang-soo looked at this Trinidadian woman sitting at a kitchen table in Chicago at midnight, 2 days after the murder of the man who had brought her here, calmly asking for a full intelligence briefing. He pulled his chair closer. He told her everything he knew. The first thing she did the next morning was cook. Not because everything was fine, because everything was not fine, and the child upstairs needed to come down to a kitchen that smelled like someone had decided he was worth feeding properly. They were gone from Chicago within 3 weeks. Nashville first, then Atlanta, a neighborhood in the Southwest where a Trinidadian woman with a soft accent was simply a neighbor and nothing more. She opened a small alteration shop 3 blocks from the church she joined in her second week. She grew peppers on the back porch and a stubborn lime tree 3 people told her would never survive a Georgia winter. She called Daniel on Sunday evenings and laughed about things that had nothing to do with any of this. She told Soo Hyun stories at night about his father. Not the version the outside world knew, the version she had seen. A man who had walked across a hospital waiting room because he could and because he had decided long ago that the ability to help is the obligation to help. Soo Hyun said one evening, "He did not know you. He did not know Daniel. He helped anyway." He was 6 years old when he said this. She said, "Because your father understood that when you are able to help and you choose not to, that choice belongs to you. He refused to own that choice." Then very quietly, Soo Hyun said, "I saw his face, the man who did it. I was in the hallway. He looked right at me and he walked away." Marlene held what he had just said the way you hold something that matters, with both hands, without gripping. She said, "Someday. But first you are going to know exactly who you are, because a man who moves before he knows himself causes damage he cannot call back. You're going to know who you are first. Then someday becomes possible." He nodded. Once, he said, "Okay." She moved them again 3 months later. She had learned that 2 of Bayek's men were asking questions in Chicago about the boy. She told Soo Hyun they were going somewhere with better light. He picked up his bag and followed her out the door without question. He was 10 years old when a man appeared on their Atlanta street 3 days in a row, not doing anything visible, just present in the way certain kinds of presence communicates everything without a word. She called Oh Chang-soo. He said, "I see him. He is one of Bayek's. Do not stay in the same pattern for the next 2 weeks." On the 4th day, Soo Hyun asked quietly, "Do we need to move again?" She said, "Not yet, but you see it too." He said, "The man on the corner." She said, "Yes." He nodded and said nothing more. He trusted her to handle it, and she trusted him to be calm, and between them that trust held everything steady. The man on the corner disappeared after 11 days. She taught him everything school would not: to cook with real attention, to read a person from the 3 seconds before they spoke, the Trinidadian proverbs her father had given her, the ones that sound like folk wisdom and are actually instructions for surviving a world that will try to reduce you. She taught him the difference between faith as a Sunday habit and faith as the thing that holds you upright when nothing else will. She taught him her words, the soft Trinidadian expressions her mother had used, the phrases that meant, "I see you and you are safe and this is home." He absorbed them the way he absorbed everything, quietly, completely. He was 15 when Oh Chung-soo came to Atlanta. The old man had spent 10 years in careful invisibility, keeping the thread of Taiwan's loyalty alive among the men who had refused to follow Baek. Not many. Enough. He knocked on the door and Marlene looked at him for a long moment. She said, "He is 15? He said, "Old enough to learn, young enough for it to become part of him." She stepped back and let him in. She sat through the entire conversation without speaking. When he finished, she looked at Soo Hyun. She asked, "What do you want to do?" He said, "I want to learn everything, and I want to be ready when the time comes." She did not tell him not to. You do not stop a river from moving toward the sea. You teach it to move with intention. She said, "You eat first, both of you, and you start tomorrow." The first man Oh Chung-soo brought to meet him took one look and walked back out of the room. The man was a former Yoon enforcer, 30 years in the life. He was not someone who walked out of rooms. Oh, Chung-soo asked, "What is the problem?" The man said, "He looks at you like he already knows what you're going to say before you say it. I need a minute." He went back in. They all went back in. Every man Oh Chang-soo brought, because whatever they saw in that 15-year-old boy made them decide, one by one, that this was the thing worth coming back for. One of the older men pulled Oh Chang-soo aside after Soo Hyun's first year of training. He asked, where did he get that from? Not from Taiwan. Taiwan was disciplined, but you could see him thinking. This one, you cannot see at all. Oh, Chung-soo thought about a Trinidadian woman at a kitchen table in Atlanta, framed sermon page on the wall. He said he had a good teacher and left it there. At 19, Bayek's men came close, not close enough. but close enough that Soo-hyun understood for the first time in his body what it meant to be hunted. Oh, Chang-soo moved him for 3 months. When he came back, he called Marlene from a phone she did not recognize. She asked, "Are you safe?" He said, "Yes." She asked, "Are you eating?" There was a pause. He said, "Marlene." She said, "Answer the question." He said, "Yes, I am eating." And she could hear in his voice underneath the man he was becoming the boy who had sat at her table in Chicago with a glass of juice he was not drinking. She said, "Good. Then whatever else is happening, you will be fine." He asked, "How do you do that?" She asked, "Do what?" He said, "Make every conversation feel like the ground is still there." She said, "Because it is. It has always been there. You just have to remember where you put your feet." He was 27 when he decided the time had come. One of Bayek's most senior men arrived at his Detroit office on a Tuesday morning to find his accounts frozen. Not by Soo-hyun's people, by the IRS, acting on an anonymous disclosure so precise, the lead investigator said it read like someone had already prepared the prosecution file and handed it over. He called Bayek. Beck said it was a coincidence. 4 days later, a second operation went the same way. Then a third. Bake stopped saying coincidence. He called a meeting of his inner circle, 14 men, a warehouse on the west side of Chicago. They arrived at 7 in the evening. Every exit of the building was already covered. Not armed men, not a threat. Just men standing at each door in complete silence, present in the way that communicated everything necessary without a word. One of the 14 was a man who had been in this world for 30 years. He looked at the man standing at the nearest door. He looked at the stillness of him. And he felt something move through him he had not felt since he was 19, and new to all of it. He said quietly to the man beside him, "These are Yun Tai-wan's people." The man beside him said nothing, because if that was true, then the boy had grown up. And if the boy had grown up, then everything Beck had built was already gone. They sat in that warehouse for 40 minutes. Then, one by one, they stood and walked out. The last man stopped at the door. He looked at the man standing in front of it. He said, "Tell him I waited. Tell him I was always going to wait." On the last night of the quiet season, Baek Sung-chul sat in a room and watched the door open. He had been told a man wanted to meet with him. He arrived still believing he could negotiate his way through anything. He was still doing the calculation when Soo-hyun walked in, and the calculation stopped, not because he chose to stop it, because the part of his mind that had always found the angle, the leverage, the opening, went completely quiet. He recognized what he was looking at, the same quality he had spent 17 years beside in Taiwan and had never understood. He understood it now, sitting across from the sun, everything he had tried to take looking back at him. Soo-hyun sat down. He set one thing on the table, a photograph. His father at his desk on an ordinary afternoon, alive in the way people are alive on days nobody knows are among the last ones. He said, "You looked at me in that hallway. I was 5 years old. You decided I was not worth accounting for." His voice was completely level. Beck said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had understood the moment the door opened that whatever he might have said was already irrelevant. Soo-hyun said, "You were wrong about my father's code. You thought it made him weak. It was the reason every man who served him chose to wait for me rather than follow you. You inherited an organization. I inherited people. There is no version of this where those two things are equal." He picked up the photograph. He stood. And Baek Sung-chul, who had not been afraid of a single person in 30 years, felt the specific fear that comes not from a threat, but from the complete understanding that what is sitting across from you has already finished everything it came to finish. He said, "The woman who raised me taught me that consequence is not anger. It is not revenge. It is simply the shape that truth takes when it finally arrives." He walked out. Baek sat in that room alone. The guards outside said he never called out, never asked for anything. He just sat. They said it was the quietest room that still had a person in it. Yoon Soo-hyun took his father's seat. 27 years old, his father's code intact. The moral architecture of a woman from Fyzabad, Trinidad, built into him one meal and one story and one Sunday morning at a time. The night he took his seat, 12 men who had been waiting 22 years sent the same message through different channels. It said, "We are here. Tell us where to be." He sent back one reply to all 12. It said, "I know. Thank you for waiting." When Soo Hyun rose, Marlene stepped back. Her choice entirely. She had not spent 26 years building this man to stand at the edge of his power. She returned to Atlanta, her shop, her garden, her church choir on Sunday mornings, her calls with Daniel. She grew her lime tree through its 5th winter and its 6th. They spoke at Christmas the first year. She had made her first Korean rice cakes, and they came out sideways. He laughed, the full kind, the rare kind she had heard from him perhaps a dozen times in 26 years. She asked if he was eating. He told her he had a private chef. She told him that was not what she asked. He told her he was eating properly. His number changed the following spring. The silence grew from weeks to months, then 2 years. She decided this was something she could live with. She was not a woman who measured the success of her work by whether the person she raised still called. The evidence was out there. That was enough. What she did not know was that the silence was not complete on his end. He had a man in the neighborhood, had since the day she moved back, quiet and unremarkable. Someone who looked like he belonged on that street because he had learned to. Soo Hyun had never told Marlene. She would have opposed it with everything she had. He was not going to leave her unwatched. That was simply not something he was willing to do. Baek Sung-chul was gone, but certain things that people build outlast them. His most committed subordinate was a man named Lim Dae-ho. He had been in federal custody during the quiet season and emerged 14 months later into a world where everything he had expected was gone. He went through Baek's private records looking for something that existed beyond the reach of Soo Hyun's defenses. He found one entry buried deep in the files. Marlene Celestine Joseph, Trinidadian National, Alteration Shop, Southwest Atlanta, Guardian to Yoon Soo Hyun. Baek's note at the bottom, no operational role, not a factor. Lim Dae-ho read that note and understood something Baek had missed 22 years ago and was still missing from beyond the grave. The most exposed thing a powerful man has is not his enemies. It is the people he loves who live outside his walls. He spent 3 months finding her. She was not hiding. A 62-year-old black woman growing a lime tree and singing in a church choir, perfectly invisible. He did not go for her body. He went for everything else. The rumors entered the church community through the side door, in a low voice, attached to a question rather than a statement so they could travel without ownership. They said Marlene Joseph was not what she appeared, that her years of generosity had been funded by money with a story she did not talk about. Then came the one that did the real damage. They said her faith was a front. In a community where Marlene had been known for 11 years, as a woman of quiet, genuine faith, that suggestion was the kind of wound that does not need to be proven to bleed. People became careful. They sat further away. They smiled with the quality of people who are no longer certain what they believed about someone was ever accurate. Marlene sat through her Sunday services with her back straight and her hands folded and her face giving nothing away. She was not going to perform her innocence. She was not going to collapse in front of people waiting to see if she would. Then they came for her shop. A Tuesday evening. She smelled the smoke before she saw it. She stood on the pavement across the street and watched 4 years of work burn with the same stillness she brought to everything that required her not to break in public. She did not call anyone. Then they came for her garden. She came home to find the backyard destroyed. Every plant pulled from the soil and left broken. The peppers, the tomatoes, the herb bed, and the lime tree. The one that had survived 6 Atlanta winters. Pulled out by the roots and left on its side in the dirt. She stood at the back door for a long time. She thought about the 5-year-old boy who had sat at a kitchen table in Chicago with a glass of juice he was not drinking. She went inside. She sat at the kitchen table. She looked at the framed page on the wall that read, "What we owe each other." She thought about calling Soo Hyun. She turned it over until she could see every side, and every side said the same thing. No, these people had done this to reach him. She was the door they were knocking on because they could not find the one that led to him. She had spent 26 years standing between this man and the things that wanted to consume him. She was not going to be the one who opened that door. She called her pastor instead, Pastor Elias Freeman. 80 years old. She told him enough. She gave him a number written on a piece of paper she had carried in her Bible for 2 years. She told him to use it only if she could not be reached by any other means, and that if that day came, whoever answered would come. 3 weeks later, 2 men came to her door telling her the property owner was not renewing her lease. 30 days, nothing to discuss. She called Pastor Freeman that evening. She told him to use the number. The call reached Soo Hyun at 11:43 at night. His man on the ground had already given him the outline. The pastor gave him the rest. Every detail, every week, everything that had been done to her and everything she had refused to do about it. He listened without speaking. When the pastor finished, the line was quiet. Then Soo Hyun said, "Is she safe right now?" The pastor said, "She is with me." He said, "Keep her there. I am on my way." He did not call his driver. He did not contact his security or alert a single person in the organization. He put on his coat. He walked to his car. He drove south out of Chicago into the dark. 4 hours and 12 minutes later, his car stopped outside Pastor Freeman's house in southwest Atlanta. The pastor opened the door, looked at this Korean man who had driven through the night alone, and said nothing, because nothing needed saying. He stepped aside. Marlene was in the sitting room, straight-backed, hands folded, completely composed. Not because nothing was happening inside her, but because she had decided long ago that her interior weather was her own business. He crossed the room and sat across from her. He looked at her face. He looked at her hands. He took in what the past weeks had cost her with the full, unhurried attention of someone who refuses to look away from the things that matter. Then, in the soft Trinidadian phrases she had taught him over years of kitchen evenings, imperfect but deliberate, he said, "You should have called me sooner." She said, "You know why I did not?" He said, "Yes. That is the most you thing you have ever done." Something moved across her face that was not quite a smile, but contained one. She said, "You drove alone. 4 hours. You did not eat before you left." A pause. He said, "No." She stood. She went to the pastor's kitchen and made something from whatever was there. She set a plate in front of him. She sat back down. He said, "They destroyed your garden," she said. "I know what they destroyed. Eat first." Then we talk. He ate. She watched. And in that sitting room in southwest Atlanta in the middle of the night, the most feared Korean crime, boss in America, sat across from a 62-year-old Trinidadian woman who was not his mother by blood and ate the food she made him without another word. Not by blood, by 26 years of showing up. Lim Dae-ho was identified within 24 hours. Every person on every page found within 48. Soo Hyun closed the file and said to the man by the door, "All of them, every person. I want them found, Lim Dae-ho last, alive. I need them to understand exactly what is happening to them and why." He spent 4 days in Atlanta first. On Sunday, he sat beside Marlene in her regular church pew. He did not introduce himself to anyone. He simply sat there with the quality of presence he had always carried, the kind that changes a room without doing anything visible. By the end of the service, 3 women had crossed the church to speak to Marlene with the warmth of people who have decided where they belong. By the following Sunday, every pew around her was full again. On Monday, he met with the property owner, a man named Gerald Sims. He arrived at the meeting expecting a negotiation. Soo Hyun was already in the room, sitting completely still, looking at the door when it opened. Gerald Sims stopped walking before he had fully entered the room. He could not have said why. The man in the chair had not moved, had not spoken. There was simply something in the quality of his stillness that communicated, without words or gesture, that the room had already decided what was going to happen in it. The lease was renewed before Soo Hyun stood up. Gerald Sims called his lawyer twice that afternoon. He told him, "I met someone. I am not going to do anything to that woman's property ever again." On Wednesday morning, before driving back to Chicago, he went to the burnt shell of Marlene's shop. The 3 men who had come into her shop and gotten in her face were already there. Not by choice. They had been brought. They stood in the blackened walls and the smell of old smoke and looked at the Korean man who had just walked in. One of them recognized him before he spoke. Not from a photograph, from the way he entered the space. The man had been in the life long enough to know what it looked like when someone walked in, and the room immediately understood it belonged to them. He said very quietly to the man beside him, "That is Yoon Soo-hyun." The man beside him went completely still. The third man did not know the name, but he read everything he needed from the other two faces. Soo-hyun stood in the middle of that burnt floor and looked at each of them in turn. He said, "She came to this city with nothing but her hands and her faith, and she built something here. You walked into it, and you treated her like she was beneath you. You mocked her voice. You shorted her work. You got in her face in her own shop. You thought she was nobody." He paused. He said, "You were standing in front of the most important person in my life, and you treated her like furniture. I need you to understand what that cost you, not as a threat, as a permanent fact about the rest of your lives." The man who had recognized him started to say something. Soo-hyun looked at him. Just looked at him. The words stopped before they formed, because there was nothing in that look that was aggressive or performed. It was simply the look of a man who has already finished everything and is now allowing the other person to understand that. The two men who had pulled her garden from the ground were brought back to the yard where they had done their work and made to stand in it and understand what they had reached into. Not quickly, completely. The people who had carried the rumors through the church received quiet visits from people they did not recognize, who knew everything about what they had done. Every single one of them called the pastor within 48 hours to say they had been mistaken. The pastor thanked each one and told them he would pass along the correction. Lim Dae-ho was last, brought to a plain room in Chicago, a table, 2 chairs. Soo-hyun sat across from him and placed one photograph on the table, not a document or a file, a photograph of Marlene, standing outside her church on a Sunday morning, back straight, chin level. A photograph he had kept on his phone for 2 years, taken without her knowing, on a morning he had driven past the church just to see that she was still there and still herself. He said, "She is 62 years old. She came to this country to repay a debt to a man who is dead. She raised me across 3 cities on night shifts and borrowed names. She carried me out of the night my father was murdered when I was 5 years old and kept every promise she made in the dark. She built a shop. She grew a garden. She sang in a church choir and was known in that community for 11 years as a woman of complete and genuine faith." He said, "You found her name in a dead man's file and decided she was the easiest way to reach me. You burned what she built. You poisoned her name. You sent men to pull her garden out of the ground with their hands." He picked up the photograph and put it back in his jacket pocket. He said, "She is fine. She has everything she needs. Whatever you tried to take from her, she kept. She always keeps the things that matter." He stood. He said, "You thought I had left something unprotected. You were right. That was my error. I have corrected it now. And you are going to spend the rest of your life understanding the cost of the error you made." He walked out. The door closed. The 2 men standing outside that door had been in the life for a combined 40 years. Neither of them spoke for a full minute. Then one said, "I understand now why they waited 22 years. The other said nothing. He just nodded. Lim Dae-ho was finished. Every financial connection severed. Every loyalty evaporated. Every door closed permanently. He had touched the wrong woman, and the man who loved her had made sure every person who participated understood exactly what that had cost them. Marlene's new house was 3 blocks from the church on a quiet street with a backyard that received the best morning light in the neighborhood. The garden was rebuilt from the ground up. A new lime tree planted in the southeast corner, young and patient, and, as Marlene told the designer with complete seriousness, with every intention of surviving a 7th winter. She accepted the 2 security people Soo-hyun arranged. She told them on their first morning that she cooked for more than one person every evening, expected them to eat when food was offered, and to please do something about those shoes because no serious person stood for 8 hours in shoes like that. Soo-hyun came on Sundays. Not every Sunday. Enough Sundays. He sat at her table the way he had always sat, present, still, nothing performed. She corrected his posture the way she had been doing since he was 7 years old, and he accepted it without comment because he had understood since he was 7 that the correction was a form of attention, and attention from her was never something to resist. She told him things about his parents she had been saving, not the large things, the small ones. She said one Sunday morning, "Your father used to straighten everything on the table before he sat down. The cutlery, the glasses, everything parallel and in order. He did it without looking, like his hands needed to do it before the rest of him could be still. I saw it once when Oh Chang-soo brought me to a meeting. He did not know anyone was watching. Soo Hyun looked at the table in front of him. He had, without noticing, straightened the cutlery when he sat down. He said, "I do that." She said, "I know. I have watched you do it at this table for 11 years. Something moved across his face slowly and completely, the way a change in light moves across open ground, altering everything it touches and settling into something that will hold. She thought about a man who had walked across a hospital waiting room in Houston, because he could, and because he had decided long ago what kind of man he was going to be, and then had simply been that man every day. She thought about a 5-year-old boy at a kitchen table with a glass of juice he was not drinking. She thought about a 10-year-old who had spotted the man on the corner before she pointed him out. A 15-year-old who had said, "I want to learn everything," and then done exactly that. A phone call at 19. "Are you eating?" "Yes, Marlene, I am eating." 26 years of meals and stories and Sunday mornings and the slow patient daily work of showing a person who they already were. She got up to refill his cup. He said, "Sit, I have it." She sat. He filled her cup first. Both hands around the pot the way she had shown him when he was 8 years old, the way her own mother had shown her. It was not about the tea, it was about the person you were pouring it for. The simplest possible way of saying, "You are the first thing I think about in this moment." He set the pot down. Outside the kitchen window, the new lime tree stood in the southeast corner of the garden in the morning light. Young, unhurried, entirely serious about surviving. The debt she had come to pay 26 years ago had become something that had no name in any language either of them spoke. Not obligation, not duty, not even love exactly, though it held love inside it the way a river holds the rain that made it, completely, without remainder. It was what her husband had been writing about on the last morning of his life. What we owe each other, not the debt, the answer. You show up, you stay, you fill the cup of the person across from you before you fill your own. Not because you must, because you decided every morning for 26 years that this is who you are. And on Sunday mornings, if you have done it right, the person you showed up for sits at your table and fills yours first. If this story reached something in you, you already know what to do, like this video. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the most powerful thing in the world is not money or fear or position. It is faithfulness. Subscribe to JudCee Stories and turn on your notifications, because the next story is already on its way and it will reach you even deeper than this one did. Drop a comment and tell us which moment stayed with you the most. And tell us where you are watching from. We read every single one. See you in the next story.